I'm Tony Ruiz, contributing editor at Gold Derby here with Nobel Prize winner Kazuo Ishiguro, who is now Oscar nominated for his adapted screenplay of Living. And this is based on a Kurosawa film, and I always find it interesting when you talk about adapting a film. I'm wondering, is there something in the original film that both drew you to that idea of adapting it, or was there something maybe you thought that was missing in the original film that you wanted to explore more in this adaptation?
That's a really interesting way to put it. I think it's both of those things. Certainly that there was that I found there was something very powerful about the original Japanese movie, and actually I first saw it when I was 11 years old or 12 years old, and it had an enormous impact on me. I was a Japanese kid growing up in England, and it was very difficult to see Japanese movies or anything Japanese much. I'm talking about the 1960s here. Uh, the world wasn't this kind of very international connected place it is today, and so partly I think it was because I was looking at something to do with Japan that wasn't samurai. It looked almost like the world I would have lived in had my family not moved. It also looked like the world that we were about to return to, and so it's partly that I felt I was peeking into this other life I would have or may have had, But also, I think quite nothing to do with Japan. I think it really spoke to me about how I should live when I grew up. And actually, it's a film I returned to over and over again through my teenage years. And when I was a student, I would always seek it out if it was on at some art house cinema or at our university cinema club or something. And I think it's because it tells you that you don't have to turn yourself into some kind of superstar. You don't have to become wildly successful in some kind of external sense. It says, even if you have a normal, ordinary, humble, maybe dreary life, you can really interrogate that life, and you might be able to find a way to turn it into a magnificent one and a really fulfilled one. And when I was growing up, I never imagined I was going to be talking to you like this, an Oscar nominee with a Nobel Prize. I mean, I just thought I was going to be like those people in our film Living. I was going to be one of those commuters going into London with bowler hats. And for 7 years, I went in to my school with those guys. I traveled into my school by train, and I was on the same commuter line as the commuters going from our home county's English town into the center of London for their office work. And I would stand there with all these guys dressed much like they are in our movie, with their bowler hats. And I had no reason to suppose that when I got to a certain age, I wouldn't be one of them. And so I think I always wanted to marry that material in the Kurosawa movie with something that I had felt myself about growing up in England and about Englishness. So all right, so that's rather a convoluted way of answering your question. So for me, yes, there was something really important there. I wanted to bring to a new generation of filmmakers, film watchers and film fans. But there was something other that isn't in that film that I wanted to put into this new version. It was a marrying of that material with more personal material that I wanted to express.
I'm curious, just from a practical perspective, is there a marked difference in your approach when you're writing a screenplay, especially whether it's an adaptation or not? Is there a marked difference in your approach to the process than there is, say, when you're crafting a novel?
I've found that there is an enormous difference. First of all, obviously, there's a difference between writing for the page and writing for the screen. But in some ways, the biggest surprise for me was how different it was to do an adaptation as opposed to something that I'm originating myself. this is the first time in my life I've done an adaptation of any sort. I've done screenplays before, not many, but I have dabbled in screenplays before, but that was always original material, and my novels are all original material. And some novels are less original material than you think. Actually, sometimes people write a novel about someone who's been really alive, or about some kind of a recent court case or something. You have a fictionalized version. I've never done that. My novels tend to be out and out, generated from my own imagination. And so for me, that was the really novel experience. And I found it was a kind of like a really split personality thing. I had to really split my personality down the middle, because there's a part of me that really wants to convey something of what I felt, when I was that boy and that teenager growing up, when I saw the original Japanese movie. I felt there's something really powerful and important that I have to bring to a new generation here. So, I wanted to preserve and be faithful. And yet, there's another side of me. There's another side. You have to have this other personality that is utterly ruthless and cold and brutal. That says, no, that's right. You might call it a masterpiece or a classic, but that's going to have to go. That just doesn't work. I don't like that. So we're going to change that. So you have to have both of these things, and I think it's a really interesting process, adaptation, because it's very hard to balance that kind of reverence on the one hand, and that kind of harsh, brutal, kind of business-like mentality on the other.
So with that in mind, I've always been curious, have you ever been tempted to adapt one of your own novels?
I've never, it's never been attractive to me.
Really?
And yeah, and so historically I've always kept away from that. And at the moment I have a number of things in development right now. In fact, Guillermo del Toro announced just a few days ago in the trades that he was going to be doing an animated version of one of my novels, The Buried Giant. I mean, I've been talking to Guillermo about this for a number of years now. So it's kind of a relief that it's been announced. And Sony bought the rights to my last book, Clara and the Sun. I don't mean option; they actually bought the rights. So, but in both of those cases, I've said very clearly I don't want to write the screenplay. And that's partly because I think somebody else would do it much better than me. I mean, I honestly think that. But also, I mean, another part is just from my point of view. I mean, imagine Tony, that. I mean, I know you're a school teacher. I mean, it's like telling your kids when they get to the end of their big exams, right, you did very well. Now, would you like to do it all again? You imagine kind of reaction you get from that. I mean, that's how I feel when people say, would you like to, how would you like to do a screenplay of the novel you finished last year? I feel like, look, I struggled with this thing for like 4 years. I've moved on now. I was really pleased when I finished it, and I'm proud of it. But that's all I want to have to do with it now. So there is that. You move on, and if you're me, you're glad to move on. And of course, I still care about it, and I want it to be good. But I also think it's really important that not only that there's a fresh imagination comes to it, but that in some way the story evolves and changes a little bit. Because I don't really, okay, there's nothing wrong with the idea of the very faithful, translation from one medium into another. That's fine. But often when cinema has really taken off, when you get a very good adaptation of something that's come from literary source material or stage material, I mean, it's because it has changed. It has evolved in some very significant way. And I believe in this idea that a story keeps changing. I think this is how we've told stories through eternity. When we passed fairy tales and myths down through the generations orally. I think this is what we were doing. This is how stories really live. And I think today that process is to some extent expedited because, someone might write a novel and that gets turned into a movie. Then there's a TV series that spins off it, that that extends the story, or you have an adjacent story to it. You go into series 2 and 3, which extends the story. You have prequels, you have sequels, you have a video game. I mean, it's I find this a really interesting process. That different people bring different things to that material, and as we go through the years, we adapt the stories to speak to our particular times and our particular situation. And I think this is how stories really live. So, I like the idea that, in fact, I feel honored if a story that I have contributed into this stew, gets taken up by other people and it's changed around a bit. So I always say to people who are trying to adapt something from my books, look, just don't worry about me looking over your shoulder. You've got to really bring something of your own to it. Otherwise, it's just not going to live.
I find that so interesting, that concept of stories evolving over time, because so much of, I think, of the tradition of storytelling was an oral tradition, and it goes back to people bringing their own perspectives to the same event and putting different twists on things. I feel like that lends itself particularly to this particular film. Do you agree?
I think, well, I hope so. Otherwise, there's no point in us remaking this, very fine film from Japan, but it's 70 years old. I think there's every reason to bring it to people now, and in the form that we have done, and we've changed it, not just because the setting has changed to England. I think I feel this film says something about how an example set in one generation can be a legacy for the younger generation. And so in our film, I was keen to create more substantially the younger characters and have the sense that, to some limited extent anyway, some of them would actually respond to the example that is set by the main character, played by Bill Nighy. And yeah, maybe not in some kind of shattering, remarkable way, but it'll be a seed, and they'll carry that into the next generation. I wanted a strong sense of that because I think we have the benefit of hindsight when we look at the 1950s when the film is set. We can say with some confidence that I think Britain after the Second World War, although the country was shattered and impoverished and the people were hungry and devastated in many ways, they somehow managed to pick themselves up, and actually they built a much better Britain than the one that existed before the war. They built a solid social democracy and a liberal democracy. And I think I have a lot of admiration for that generation that managed to do that. And so I didn't think the kind of pessimism that is in the original Kurosawa film was quite warranted, because we know what that generation managed to do. So I wanted more of a sense of optimism. But I also thought this story about bureaucrats and officers where hardly anything gets done, and where people don't know how their contribution is being actually used, how the contribution they make in their work every day, I mean, where's it going? How does it connect with any other human beings? You see that physically in this kind of pre-digital age, with these piles of papers everywhere, and people having to walk from down the corridor to another office, and they get spurned, and they bring their file back again and dump it somewhere else. I think it's like a concrete metaphor for the kind of world we live in now, but it's less obvious because we do everything digitally, electronically. But I think more than ever, I think there's a sense on the part of many people in the Western world, everywhere, that it's very difficult to figure out how your little contribution that you're making every day connects up to anything, even within your own enterprise or your company or your cause. It's quite hard to know how it fits, but how does it reach other human beings? What is it doing to the community? I mean, it's kind of hard to know that. You become very disconnected, and so I think this is a story about somebody who breaks through that to some extent and understands his connection to the world and to human beings and does his utmost to try and make an impact, even if it's a small and humble one.
Yeah, you mentioned so many, that this idea of the small moments building to something, and I think that's one of the things that's so beautiful about this film is that it's not histrionic. It's not, it's these series of small moments. But I have to ask, one of my favorite scenes in this film is the use of this old folk song and that Bill sings in the bar, and I'm just curious because I was watching this film with my family, and we were all just to use one of your terms, gobsmacked by this beautiful little song. Can you tell us kind of the history of that song, and was that your idea to use it?
It was, and it's only long after the film was finished that Oliver Hermanus told me that actually he was thinking of swapping it with a different song, but Stephen Woolley, the producer, told him that I would go ballistic if he did that. So he decided not to. I didn't know about any of this, No, the song does have a personal thing for me because it's not I don't own any kind of record or recording of it at all. It's a song that I know from my wife, my Scottish wife. It's a Scottish folk song, and she learned it, I think, from her grandmother. And I think it's a song that Scottish people know, but I don't think there are any famous recordings of it. But it's it's a song that we've always sung in our family. When I say sung, my wife sings very well. I play various musical instruments, and we often sing songs. And that has been a song that I have known for 30 years, but more than 30 years. And I thought just musically, in terms of its, how Bill will sing it, I thought it would be right. But in a dramatic sense, I wanted it to function in a slightly different way to the equivalent song in the original Japanese film. In the original Japanese film, the lyrics of the song begin something like "Life is short, but," and the song seems to address the actual central themes of the story. That was a little bit too direct for my taste. So I wanted the idea that the main character had been widowed, and somewhere, he once he had been more alive than he is when we find him, and the reason he's become this kind of zombified character is something to do with bereavement, and he lost himself somewhere along the way when his wife died many years ago, and he associates this song with his wife. I mean, he makes that very clear when he sings it in the pub, and I wanted in the final scene for him to sing it again when he's alone on the swing in the snow at this moment of triumph. I didn't want something that underlined the theme or told people what this film had been about. I wanted people to think that here again, he was thinking about the wife he lost a long time ago, and somehow he has come alive again, and that maybe he's even thinking that he'll rejoin his wife. I don't know. I thought it was very important that connection with the wife that he has lost is referred to in that singing, and in that song, and so that's why I wanted the song, and that's how I wanted the song to work dramatically in the film.
I just want to ask, you've had certainly a great deal of success with your novels, with the Nobel Prize and various prizes and things like that. Does the Oscar nomination mean something different to you?
Absolutely. It's I don't think of it as some, just another prize to go along with the Nobel and the Booker or whatever. No, for me, it's an incredible honor. I've always been a huge film fan, um, and I mean that like I'm a serious film fan. You know, I mean, I've been on various film festival juries. I've been on the jury at Cannes and at Venice, and you know, I have a deep knowledge of film and a deep love of film. Um, and to think that a screenplay that I've written has come this far, you know, to get an Oscar nomination is staggering for me. I feel like a guest, but a welcome guest in both this art form and this industry. And yes, I do feel a little bit of imposter syndrome because I know that there are superb screenwriters today and in the past who produced great work for years and years and never received an Oscar nomination. So it feels kind of weird to me that, you know, here I am. I wrote the screenplay and I'm going to the Oscars as a nominee. But on the other hand, in my kind of defense, if you like, I would say that it's not like, you know, I was doing something else and I popped up and did this and this happened to me. I mean, I have actually spent decades of my life, almost every single day, thinking about stories and how they work. And I don't make a huge distinction between, you know, stories as they surface in books and stories as they surface in cinema. You know, I find fascinating the whole concept of stories, and I ask myself all these questions about, you know, what makes a good story? What is an important story to tell? What is a wrong way to tell a story? You know, when is it emotional manipulation? You know, what's an irresponsible way to tell a story? You know, because stories can be very powerful, and you can kind of lie to people as well. You know, using that power and deploying that power. But I find all the different genres fascinating, and why they exist as genres. You know, and I think about this all the time. So you know, I've arrived by a different path, if you like, to other nominees who perhaps have been working in the film industry for years and years. But for me, it was a next step I took. You know, after spending decades, you know, trying to figure out novels and short stories.
Well, I don't think the imposter syndrome is warranted, but you're more than welcome and congratulations. Everybody go to goldderby.com, make your predictions for the Oscars, and stay tuned for more Oscars coverage in the coming weeks. Kazuo Ishiguro, a very great honor and a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Tony. It's been great to talk to you. Thanks.